Philip, who is waving back there. Philip has made everything happen here today, along with Marta, please stand up, Marta. And Marta is also an Epiphan employee. Philip is in charge of the marketing. Well, whatever is needed according to his dad and all the initiative that Philip takes on his own. I can't thank you enough for hosting and for being so welcoming to all of us. And this is an outstanding location. Let's just please thank Mike and Philip and Marta for hosting us tonight. So here's the plan for the evening. I couldn't be prouder or happier. I've been a professor at publishing research for 35 years, and this is the best thing I've ever done. And it's really emotional for me to see the people in the book right here, and the fact that you shared your stories, not only with me and my co-authors, but with everybody in this room and the whole world. It's a great show of trust that you allow your stories to be out there. And it's a great story that everybody has, and a wonderful antidote to some of the other images of people, immigrants who come from different parts of the world. We think that this is a love story, this book that we have created. And we created it thanks to 150 people, yourselves included, who shared your stories. So here's the plan for the evening for about the next 45 minutes. I'd like Mike to talk a little bit about his own story for, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. He's a very accomplished entrepreneur with multiple identities, and and many. I didn't say a split personality, no, and multiple personalities. So many of us immigrants, I'm an immigrant myself, as you know, from Canada, and I'm happy that my American-born son, Doug Fraser, is here as well this evening. And so we each have a son, Mike and I. Mike has Philip, and I've got Doug here. And so in any case, these immigrant stories are I think are very topical right now. And so after Mike speaks a little bit about his background and about his companies, then I'm going to give a short PowerPoint presentation, just a little review of the book and a few anecdotes. And then I am very honored to have 3 people in the book come up to serve as panelists, and we'll get a little background about where they have been and where they are now, post-interview, which was about 3 years ago. So over to you, Mike, first of all. And Philip, you're just going to stand right here and look good, unless you need...
Yeah, because Sheila said, I have nothing to add to my story than you put to the book. It's more than enough. Even more, I'm not PhD, by the way, how it was in the book. And never been refugee, by the way, how it stands in the book. And I have nothing to add, really. I'm talking about company. If Philip is responsible for everything,
Thank
you.
See how great your dad is.
He's a great guy, I promise. Really great guy.
Come on. Tell us a little bit about Epiphan Systems. What are we doing here?
So Epiphan makes live streaming hardware encoders. So what it is essentially is a box which allows you to live stream from any HD camera to multiple content delivery networks at once. We have a variety of different products at different levels for corporations or for consumers. But really we're about the democratization of live streaming equipment. Here we go.
Thank you, Philip. Mike has several other businesses, including medical business as well. And, being a serial entrepreneur is quite an accomplishment. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. Please have a seat. And not a problem. So, Marta, we are live streaming, correct? And so I hope everyone is comfortable with that. And as I say, we believe this is a joyous event, and we're going to get started with first of all, I'm going to explain this diagram. What does it look like? It looks like a tree, right? A cross-section of a tree. Yesterday, this was published on the Northeastern University website. It's another Northeastern University professor by the name, he's a young assistant professor who has won a number of awards for this depiction of the immigration flow to America over the past 400 years. And so the colors represent different continents that people have come from over periods of time. And the green represents Europe, and this color here represents Asia, and this one represents, this one represents Latin America, and this one represents Asia. And you can go on. This is a dynamic video, and it shows that for the first 300 years, it was all green pretty much. And then, starting in the late 1800s, early 20th century, you started to get more Asians and people from Latin America. So the way the tree concentric circles of growth are depicted for the immigration patterns in America is really a fascinating sight. It takes about 5 minutes for it all to populate over the 400 years as you see it grow. So I'll send it to you, and you may find it quite interesting. So now I'd like to start the PowerPoint presentation, if Philip is able to do that for me, or maybe I should take this. No, it should, I think, excuse me. Yes, can you help me, Philip, please? All right, there we are, excellent. So, the book, as you know, I just want to say, I didn't do this alone. I came up with the idea after writing for about 30 years about various aspects of business and management in the former Soviet Union. And then I decided to turn my attention to the amazingly talented people right here in the United States who came from that part of the world and have contributed to the development of innovation and technology here in the United States and around the world. I'm so glad I got that idea. I'm so glad I got these two co-authors to join me. We interviewed 150 people, half right here in Silicon Valley and half in the Boston, Cambridge area, over the period of a year and a half. Then we wrote the book, and as you know, we promised everyone, we wanted to build trust. We said, we're not going to publish anything you're not comfortable with. And so we went back individually to 150 people, once or twice, and said, here are the quotes from all the transcripts that we have that we want to include, and please let us know you're okay with that. Thank you. 99.5% of 150 people said that, agreed. And we were grateful. We're very grateful. And how wonderful in a book of this sort, most social science books keep people anonymous. You all agreed to have your names attributed to your quotes, along with all sorts of personal information. That's what makes this book so rich. That's what makes this book so valuable. And it gives us a feeling of having created 150 new friends. And I know that we're going to maintain a relationship with all of you for a long time. We really care about you. We know your stories. So those are my co-authors. This is Sheila and the Daniels, we say sometimes. Daniel Satinsky is on the left. He's an attorney and a business consultant in technology. He spent 20 years doing negotiations between the U.S. and companies in the former Soviet Union with regard to technology. And Daniel McCarthy just retired after 52 years of very active engagement at Northeastern University. And I've been writing with him, I'm happy to say, for 30 of those years. So there's our book. And we are pleased that we were able to include among our interviewees people who came from 11 of the 15 former Soviet republics. And it's the Soviet culture that unites people, no matter what generation they came during, and also the fact that everybody is Russian speaking. All right, we wanted you to know that not only are we as authors so proud of the book, but we are getting tremendous praise for the book and what it is revealing about the highly talented people in tech from the former Soviet Union. And Lauren Graham is a professor of the history of science and technology, both at MIT and at Harvard, and you can't get any higher praise than what he said. So he feels very good about all of you as well, and your accomplishments. So basically, there's a large wave of immigration from around the world, but what we see is that there was immigration reform in 1965, which changed things dramatically. And of course, not only do immigration laws have to accommodate people coming into the United States, but all of you know, those of you who were born in the former Soviet Union, wasn't always that easy to get out. So the immigration policy of the former Soviet Union and the successor 15 independent countries also played a part in the ability of people to leave the country and to come here, and also to return if they wanted to make visits and to have business collaborations in addition to family visits. This was just in the news today. Immigration, as you know, is a hot topic. Well, there was a Gallup survey conducted of nearly 500,000 people around the world. And they were asked in 2017 if you, ideally, if you had your wish to move to another country, what would that country be? And 20% of that 500,000 people surveyed said the United States. 6%, I believe, said Canada, second in line. And you can see the rest. So America is still a hugely important and desirable destination for people to change their lives, pull up stakes, and create a new life in. Bring their talents to. So in the Soviet Union, and the migration of people from that part of the world to the United States, because of the immigration laws in the two countries, we were able to group the people over the past 40 years who came here into 3 waves. So the first one, the Cold War environment, they're predominantly the people who came from the 70s through 1986 were refugees, who were Jews, refuseniks, a very small Christian minority, people who were persecuted. They were brought here and were supported by some social service agencies, particularly the Hebrew Assistance Associations and the like. And then as Gorbachev came to power in the mid-'80s, we had perestroika and the ultimate collapse of the Soviet Union. And a lot of educational exchange programs occurred that brought people here to study. as well as just opportunities. I remember starting in 1988, Northeastern University was one of the first, we got international press about it, one of the first educational institutions to host senior executives for a 4-month period. For educational purposes, they were studying 8 hours a day how to learn about operating in a market, capitalism, because their support systems, their subsidies were being taken away in their government ministries. So they were coming to America to learn and also to do business. All right? And so a lot of people came, as I say, for educational or business purposes in Wave 2. And then finally in Wave 3, we had the economic recovery in Russia, and the other republics that were independent countries also began to flourish and sent people back and forth for educational as well as business purposes. All right, so we're going to focus on, of course, the technical elite who came here, and many of whom are sitting in this room. All right, so these, as you know, the book is over here, and I'm happy to make a transaction with you if you are interested in taking a copy home with you. And these are the various topics that are generally covered in the book. And the beauty of this is that of the 400 pages, you can turn to any page, just open it up, and there's somebody telling their story on a particular theme in that chapter. And that's what makes it so compelling. It's not just a dry book about that a bunch of stodgy academics produced. We might be stodgy academics, but we knew that this was going to be a really good book with your words in it. So I just thought I would give a few highlights about some of the things that people shared, and with regard to adapting to U.S. culture and to the U.S. tech workplace in particular. So here are some of those skills that people were talking about, smiling. Oh yeah, this was actually a woman here in Silicon Valley, and her name is Kira Makagon. She apologizes for not being able to come tonight, but she's the Senior Vice President for Innovation at Ring Central, which is really riding high right now. And so she basically says she thinks Russians don't smile a lot because it's a culture of introverts. But I'll leave that to you to contemplate. And another one is a bit of negativity. So here's another quote. The way in Russia that you approach things is that you say no 3 times. And if somebody really thinks it's worth doing, they'll come around a 4th time and keep asking. And then you can say yes. Whereas in America, you're supposed to be positive and think about how we can make things happen versus how this is not going to work. All right. And then I like the glass half empty, glass half full phenomenon here. Russians start from a glass half empty and work their way to a glass half full. Americans start in the opposite direction. And she says, I'm aware that some people think that this is negative, starting with the glass half empty. So she tries to catch herself. And what about trust? That's a big one. You know, there's so many very, very serious reasons in the former Soviet Union not to trust strangers. And so people bring that with them here, and it takes a long time to open yourself up and trust others, right? All right. This person came in the early 1980s. And so, you know, he said, because I was born in the USSR under the eyes of the KGB, and it's not a joke, of course not. You have to carefully consider what you're saying and to whom. I feel that way every day. On a personal level, it took me many years to trust another person. I don't have very many close friends, but those I do have, I have had for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It takes a substantial amount of time for me to trust a person to the level I consider necessary for friendship. And a number of people in the book, as you know, may have even been some of you, who said you find the American notion of friendship a bit superficial, right? Yeah. Okay. And then at the end, you may recall my question to you at the end was, so after all of your trajectory growing up to a certain age in the former Soviet Union, making the transition here, making that big decision to come here, who are you? What's your identity? And our chapter on identity, I think, is very meaningful. People opened themselves up and questioned themselves and said, my identity was formed in the Soviet Union. So at the core, I am Russian. But it was so heavily influenced by my being American and also having experience living in other countries. It's probably more accurate to describe my identity as an alloy of different cultures. Ilya Yaroslavsky is in Boston, and he studied in Louisiana. And so it's quite fun to hear him talk. He has a bit of a Russian accent, a bit of a Southern accent, and he is an alloy. All right, here's some upcoming events. We've got some in my hometown, in my son Doug's hometown, Winchester, coming up. We've got one at the Harvard Club in Boston, if you happen to be around there. I'm speaking at the Mensa Society in Toronto, back in Winchester, and going to Texas, and off to New York University in May as well. So now that you have seen a little bit of the book, I'd like, again, to thank Mike and Philip and all of Epiphan. Let's give them a round of applause for hosting us here. And now I'd like to bring up the panel. Yulia Vitashek, please. Nick Bilogorski and Umida Stilovska. Please have a seat, and we can just turn off the projector, please. Philip and Marta, if you could turn off the projector, please. I don't think we need that now. So Nick will be joining us. Thank you. So I would just like to briefly tell you that when I met Yulia, we did a phone interview, a Skype interview, and I was in Boston and you were here. Everybody else except you, Yulia, I interviewed in person. And it was a struggle. We had the line breaking up, but I learned a lot about you and your role at Google at the time, and you have evolved since then. Umida Stilovska is an entrepreneur, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her story coming from a cotton farm outside of Samarkand. Yulia grew up she spent some of her time in the Czech Republic, but she's originally from what part of the Soviet Union? From Moscow. All right, and Nick Bilogorski, he also had a circuitous route coming here, just like Umida. And Nick originally came with his mom to Canada. And so he's a product of the Canadian educational system with a little bit of a start in Ukraine. That's right, in Ukraine. And what part of Ukraine did you come from? From Kharkov, which I have been to. Yeah, a nice industrial city. So I thought, I'm very pleased that they have agreed to be panelists. All of you could be panelists tonight who are in the book, but these are the people that we're going to focus on this evening. And I thought we'd just first, 2 minutes each to talk about what your life was like in the former Soviet Union. Why don't we, since Nick is in the minority tonight, let's start with the man.
Thank you. I'm not sure this actually is working. Oh, it's working. Fantastic. So I was born in 1981 in Kharkov, which was Soviet Union. And I do remember it, but I was really just a child growing up. So Soviet Union ended when I was 9 years old. And I immigrated to Canada with my mother in 96. So I was 15. So part of my childhood was growing up in Soviet Union, was in the post-USSR Ukraine, and some part of it was in high school and college in Canada. I don't have very good memories of Soviet Union. It wasn't a nice time. I do remember difficult economic environment, long lines, for various products and challenges. And in school, we've moved around a lot, so I changed schools a lot. From the very early age, I knew I wanted to be in computers, in programming. I played a lot of computer games. I studied computers. We were pretty lucky that my family were able to secure a 286 computer, which was a rare feat in Ukraine at the time. But I really what resonates with me is what you said earlier about the alloy of different cultures in my identity, because as I was growing up, I just thought of myself as Russian. But then the Canadian part of me really added to the identity. And more recently, I've been doing a lot more to help Ukraine, so I realized I have that side as well. So I have multi-part of my identity is Russian, Ukrainian, and Canadian. And of course, it was fantastic to talk to you and be part of this book experience. I liked reading it. I was proud to be one of the people that you featured in the book.
Growing up in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the book, and I'm very humbled and honored to be one of those 150 plus entrepreneurs. I keep telling myself I'm not there yet where I want to be, but we are working on it. So I am originally from Uzbekistan. In the book you mentioned it's a little away from Samarkand, but I am from the south part of Uzbekistan. We are close to Afghanistan. It's 450 kilometers away from Samarkand, where I actually had master's. I went to Samarkand to study master's, but then I left. Anyways, my childhood, I remember Soviet times a little bit. I also grown up partially during the Soviet Union until age of 13, and then independence came. So we had a little bit challenging times at the time, especially being from the very south. We grew up planting cotton from age of 5. I cannot imagine, but all farm fields from cotton to anything else you have on your table that is served, right? So partially family also in that part of the country, we survive from doing the farming. We always exchange instead of having being paid, especially after the independence. It changed a lot for the people that people lost jobs and there was nobody paying them. So government was paying those people in exchange for bread or oil kind of situation. So during the Soviet Union, we had kind of good childhood. I mean, good means like we could buy everything from the store. And then after when we became independent, overnight everything became really, it was thrown out of the window. So my parents didn't have a cash in the bank account. At that time, my mother, she was very professional. She was actually managing accountant for entire village. At the time, we call it kolkhoz. And then my father worked in the lab for cotton. So these jobs were taken away eventually from them because they didn't have the higher education. So that's the kind of, we did struggle during the school years. We grew up, I feel like our generation was lost. We didn't really have a Russian anymore in the school, especially at that part of the village. And then we didn't have any books to study because everything was printed during the Russia time. Now it changed, right? Situation, government, everything changed. So we really didn't have books. I feel like, I don't know, I cannot remember what we really studied. So, but my passion was really, to see the world. So I followed my dreams, and I studied German linguistics because that was the only language we had in the school. And then first time I went to Germany, and then in Samarkand I started working in the tourist industry. and I met a professor, and then I eventually ended up marrying him. That brought me to Europe. I lived in Czech Republic a few years, and in Switzerland, and in Czech Republic, I started to do my own business. First, I started restaurant business, and then I started seeing more and more immigrant people having problems, legal issues in the country. So I helped in one crime. I worked for the, I was just, there was a criminal case, so I called the police. I could be helpful for them because the criminals were from my country, young people involved. And from there, I started immigration agency to help illegal workers finding legal jobs. And in 2009, I got American green card, and I left Czech Republic, and I came to Hawaii. So in Hawaii, I didn't speak any English when I came to United States. I communicated with my husband in German, and then I learned Czech in Czech Republic. So I started going to college, and I had taken MBA class without knowing any English at the Shidler College at the University of Hawaii. And from there, I started to understand what, everything is. So I have been doing, still working.
We'll hear about that in the next segment. Thank you, Rita.
Well, I guess we share living in Czech Republic for 3 years. I had it somewhere in there. I think most of my memories, I've had a pretty happy childhood. Most of I remember now is the simplicity of Soviet Union, right? Bread was black and white, butter was one kind. I still go to the store and buy the cheapest butter because I really don't know what all the options are, and there's 40 of them. So I miss that simplicity sort of life that allowed a lot of intellectual discussions and things that we talk about, and I still talk mostly to my Russian friends about. Things like, traditional Russian sort of, the essence of life. Why are we here? Where did we come from? A lot of discussions about what's going on. So there's that. There was a lot of parades. All of us were Komsomol members, party members. I was the head of the Pioneer organization. So we paraded for most of my childhood. I've been in a parade. Or in the later childhood, I was either on the tank or protesting, or, there's the 91 where I was 14 in 91, and 91 was relatively peaceful. So in Moscow, everybody got to ride on the tank, which my first time, hey, I got to ride on the tank in the city. That was kind of cool. And then sort of 93 happened, and 93 was pretty dramatic, and it was really scary. And my grandparents actually live about 7 blocks away from the White House. So that was a little bit challenging. And I think most of it, this was school. Most of enjoyment and most of the things that came from school. I went for physics and math high school that was affiliated with the Russian Physics and Math University. We had, for those of you who have children in American schools, we had 20 hours of math. We had 10 hours of physics, and there were some humanities mixed in. So when I went to college in America, I took sociology, which wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but it is what it is. And I think most of the things that I do miss about Soviet Union is a shared culture. Anybody who comes out from that country read the same books. We've all had the same textbooks. There's sort of a fundamental universal quantifier for everyone, where we all have that basis that sort of Soviet government decided that we should all have. And I wouldn't trade that. I certainly benefited, the way I look at it, I benefited from both worlds, from the world that taught me physics and math and allowed me to be successful in this country, as well as, America that has a lot of opportunity to go do what you want to do in the format you want to do with people you want to do.
Are you relating to some of these stories? Yeah. All right. So there are some good memories of life in the Soviet Union. You worked pretty darn hard from the age of 5 in the cotton fields. I don't think that was such a good memory, but I remember you were the top German student
people were happy all the time. We never were depressed. We didn't know what was depression was.
I don't think is there a Russian word for depressed? I mean, I totally agree with you. There's never been, there's, like you hear everybody here saying, oh, I'm so depressed, and you're like, what do you mean?
Life is pretty good here, yes. And not to leave out Nick, but obviously you didn't say too much about your memories of back in Kharkov, Ukraine, but we're going to move along. And you're going to now, please tell us about the transition, perhaps in your case, Nick, moving to Canada at the age of 15 with your mom, and what were some of the things that stood out for you that you had to deal with immigrating to the West?
So my mom and my dad split up. They got divorced, and me and my little brother moved to Vancouver, Canada. I was 15 at the time, and he was 6. And my mom was a student, so we both lived on her basically scholarship, stipend money. And I started working at a fairly early age of 15, 16, just for a cash job. I was a gardener. At the same time, I was going to school and wanted to continue towards a career in computer science. I always had interest in hackers and viruses and all kind of ways to break into computers and defend them. But I think an interesting observation about many of us immigrants is that once we make a decision to change our lives and we start that engine towards moving towards a better life, we get that momentum, and sometimes we keep on moving. So we may go through several stops on the way, several countries, several different cities. So for me, for example, it was Kharkiv to Canada to Silicon Valley, right? For you, it was Moscow to Czech to Silicon Valley, right? The transition in Canada was, a lot of it was very different. The language was one barrier. I had to learn to speak English well. And what really helped me was one of my first jobs, in addition to being a gardener, was telemarketing, calling people on the phone. And basically people would hang up and scream at you. And when they wouldn't, you would take down what they say and put it in the computer. So that helped me with the language transition. But yeah, learning the language, being able to provide for myself and work and study and further my education, that was kind of the big themes around the first couple of years of the integrating into Canadian society, which was very different than the Ukrainian world that I was used to.
Transitioning to Europe and then to here.
Well, first time when I came to Europe, it was my dream country was Germany. So first time I left Uzbekistan in 2004 to Germany as a babysitter, au pair Mädchen. So I was there for a couple of months only. And then I came back to Uzbekistan and I started working in the museum and then in a tourist hotel. So after that, in 2006, I went to Czech Republic, where I got married. And at that time, for me, I didn't speak any Czech. And in Czech Republic, culture was a little bit difficult because when you look Asian, you really look down. People really don't want to. I have never seen any discrimination, like very strong discrimination anywhere else, but in that country. However, I didn't know how long I will be staying in that country, so I started to looking for a job, but I couldn't get any job. My diploma was already trashed, I started from there first restaurant business, and then I started meeting people with different problems, and then started this agency, as I said, and that was very, very challenging. If I had official meetings, I had to bring my Czech friends with me in order to get the meeting or even the conversation going. So, but I had hope. I thought if you are, one thing what keep me moving is if you cannot get any job, then cleaning. A lot of people with the PhD, master's degree, they were doing the same, working in the hotels, doing the really menial jobs, right? That's not what I wanted to do. So I kept pushing. If I can't find a job, then I have to create them. That was kind of my motto, to keep that pushing. So that never ended after coming to United States. I immediately, after being in the country 1 year, I started my startup as well. It was very challenging because I had to communicate through Google Translation, German to English with my employees. So, and that's how I learned English. And then I had to come to Silicon Valley. I faced another set of challenges, but I am very, very happy where I am today. Since, yeah.
We'll talk about
Yes.
that next round.
So I actually landed on the East Coast in a small college, liberal arts college called Connecticut College. Prior to leaving Russia, I was already working. I had a job as a purchasing manager for a luxury line. For those of you who have affinity for luxury goods, I was first purchasing manager for Waterman pens in Russia. So I had a very real job. I was really sort of already working. And then the opportunity to go to college in America came up, and I sort of decided to take it. So I arrived, I thought college, university in Russia is a big deal. People sort of tend to dress up. So I arrived in a business suit on an American campus where everybody's wearing J. Crew and sort of sneakers and hasn't showered in a couple of days. And there was a little bit of a culture shock. I also had about 4 months of English lessons. So I spoke a little bit of English, just enough to figure out what's going on, but not enough to really be productive or actually take any lessons. So, it used to take me a couple hours to get through a page of text. And the first semester of college was a bit brutal. I credit my actually freshman year advisor, who was a former Croatian knight, who basically led me through this transition. And he broke all the rules, and we used to have wine in his office. He's passed away, so please do not report him. But it was incredibly challenging. I mean, the culture shock is bad. You don't fit in. You can't speak. You can't communicate. You can't make any friends. Your family is 8 hours away. You have no idea how anything works, and somehow you got to make it to class. Took me about 6 months before I was somewhat fluent in English. It took me another year before I felt like I belong. And I think what really got me through is that I really didn't want to fail, and I didn't really want to quit, right? And I think that's also a very cultural aspect to all the Russians, is that we generally, no matter what it is, we generally try not to fail, and we try very hard.
Thank you, all of you. Let's give them a round of applause for giving us some background about the transition. And Yulia, I'm going to have you start this one. This is my last question, my last formal question before we open it up for questions from and discussion. And that would be, would you give us a quick recap of what you've done up until recently and your latest venture?
So that's pretty straightforward. I graduated from college. I got a job working for a Microsoft provider because I had a computer science degree, an economics degree, and an arts and technology degree, and I wanted to be somewhere close to arts, so it had to be East Coast, somewhere close to technology, so it had to be Philadelphia. Spent three and a half years working for the partner, learned everything there is to learn about actually programming, doing DBA access and all of that. Decided that it was kind of fun, but it'd be a lot more interesting to actually work for a company that makes software. Went and worked for a highly specialized vendor that did publishing solutions for textbooks and magazines. Worked for all the top textbooks and publishers all across the world. Spent about 7 years on the road. Lived out of a hotel in Belgium, so I had the 16th century room all to myself for about 2 years because I didn't feel like I wanted to be anywhere other than the hotel. Then somewhere in there, I was trying to become an art dealer, and it was actually at Art Expo in New York. I was there, was the client I was representing. I met someone who ended up being my husband, who was West Coast based. So we talked a little bit about East Coast and West Coast, and he made a very smart move about bringing me to California in March, and it was 10 degrees below in Philadelphia, and it was beautiful California. So it kind of sealed the deal for California, and then I, on the absolutely random sort of thing, applied to work for Google, joined Google, had no idea why they hired me, it was at the time that Google generally interviewed everybody, hired them, and then figured out what to do with people. So I kind of showed up, and I'm like, I'm going to do something. I don't know what it is, but I'd love to be successful at it. Had a very successful career at Google. I joined 2 years later, so I launched Google eBooks first, then it became Play eBooks, worked on Play launches all across the globe, launched it in 27 different countries. Early on, saw potential of cloud. At the time, Google Cloud consisted of one product. Spent 5 years watching us make a transformation from a product to a platform offering. Got a chance to build a very large team that's set in 10 different locations. Got a chance to sort of define what the technical delivery for cloud looks like. Left about a year ago, spent a little bit of time having a life and making some friends and actually showing up for some parties. And then now I have my own consulting business. I'm consulting for cloud for technical delivery. And I'm also trying to get funded for a startup for an idea that I have, that I did something for my household while I was not working. So I'm trying to extend it and have a membership subscription for my service.
Sure. So the past couple of years?
Yeah, but can you talk about, give a quick recap of how you got to where you are now?
So as I graduated college in Canada, I realized I want to work with computers. I want to work writing software, and I want to, ideally, I want to defend companies from cyber attacks, from hackers, from viruses, right? So I got a job in Vancouver at a company that was doing that called Fortinet. And luckily enough, 8 years after that, the company went public. So I was there pre-IPO. And then several years into it, I decided that I want to keep going, and I immigrated to Silicon Valley. So I worked for a couple of more companies. One of them was Facebook. I was at Facebook as one of the early-ish engineers. It was about 500 people when I joined. So this was 2010. I spent 2 years at Facebook as being their cybersecurity malware response engineer. What I was doing there was basically hunting Russian hackers that were hacking Facebook and trying to bring them to justice. And then since then, I've was part of the team that started a company and built it for 7 years and sold it to a larger company called Juniper Networks. So that was a very interesting entrepreneurial experience for me. It was all in security, all in computer viruses, hacker defense field. So now I have about 15, 16 years of experience in that field, and I plan to continue either working or starting another company. The other kind of big part of my life is giving back. I've been pretty fortunate joining Facebook, joining Fortinet, companies that went public. And now I started investing my own money into startups. So I try to network with potential entrepreneurs and fund their ventures. And I've also been doing charity work in Ukraine, collecting donations and trying to provide humanitarian aid to Kharkiv, my city, and other cities in Ukraine that are suffering in the current conflict.
Unlike both of you, I didn't really go get, I started to study, but I didn't finish it, and I didn't go out and work for another company because I knew maybe I'm not qualified. I didn't much believe in myself, but I kept pushing, doing my own startup. In 2011, I started a video gamification platform, and for 7 years, I tried to make this happen. I wanted to be one of those Google and Facebook. But unfortunately this year, beginning of this year, I decided it's time to let it go and a little bit rest and then come back again. So at the time, after like 2 years ago, I joined another startup in clean tech industry. So we are now ready to launch our first product to the market. So we develop commercial and commercial and personal power generators. So one of the products that is coming out to the market is our personal X200 product. It's a hand crank generator. So 5-minute cranking gives you 1 hour energy for 100 voltage. When you are traveling or you are camping or you have a natural disaster, it's no energy that can support you with, cook your rice or make your tea, kind of charge your small appliances. So they also have a developed ready-to-market product, personal lantern that is, it generates energy based on the salt water, also can charge your phones. And so we are kind of reinventing the new generation of wind turbines, and I am mainly involved in right now partnerships and marketing and fundraising process of the company. So you never know where it goes. So I am hoping that this technology will make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And then, yeah, that's where I am right now.
Thank you, Rita. Well, as you can see, everybody's an entrepreneur here, and experience in large companies, experience in different parts of the world, and utilizing a depth of experience and education. And I want to give a big shout out to the Soviet educational system. That is what propelled all of you talented people to come here and hit the ground running. You talked about, 20 hours a week of math and physics in high school, I guess.
7, well, starts in 5th grade and goes 5th through 10th, so equivalent of your end of elementary school all the way from middle and high school.
I got an email from a former student the other day, who's Daniel Glushkov. He's from Bulgaria, and he has an 8-year-old son. They live in Newton, Massachusetts. He contacted me and said, our child isn't being challenged enough in the Newton school system, so we're trying to, and we're doing piano and Russian math and all sorts of things to supplement, but we're thinking of putting him in a private school. And I said, well, my 2 kids went to the public school in Winchester, Massachusetts. They turned out all right, but when you have the standard of the Soviet orbit educational system, which is so very rigorous, that's a tough standard to meet. And of course, the Newton school system in Massachusetts is one of the top public school systems in the whole state, if not the country. It's a top school in this whole state. So it's not measuring up to Soviet educational standards. Oh, it's literally number 1. My son Doug would know, since he went to the number 2 school in the state. All right. Well, so the education is a wonderful thing, and being an educator myself all these decades, I can't say enough about it, enough positive things about it. So let's open up. What do you relate to? What stories do you have of your own? What questions do you have of our distinguished panel and your fellow book stars? Please. Yes, go ahead, and please introduce yourself. Oh, yes, you do, because you won't get recorded.
Thanks, Celia. My name is Raj, and I came with Amita. Question was, you came here, and I'm an immigrant from India myself. If you have to say yourself one thing that you really, really benefited by American people, not the system or the culture in general, which you didn't get before, if you can highlight that.
Such a good question. I'll take a shot. You have us all stumble. It's a great question, and I've already regretted things I've said in the book because I read it 2 years later, and I was like, oh, I really shouldn't have said that. I think American people, and obviously I'm married to an American. In general, their ability to believe in improving things and ability to make change is unbelievable. It's something that I struggle with, something that certainly my husband wakes up and he's like, the world's going to be better, we're going to make a change. And I'm like, it's never better, it always rains and this winter comes and so that optimism, the belief that you can actually change the system. And now I go back to Russia. I mean, I used to have a business in Russia. I go back all the time, and it's still like the belief that you can change the system is completely absent from the system, from like any Russian system. Where in America, people actually can make change, right? We all protested immigration stories and sort of were action for change. So that would be the one thing that absolutely fascinates me, and I'm generally not an optimist. So I get it from my husband, and it's been really, really great. And he gets a little bit of my realism on occasion as well.
For me, in America, I feel like people are more open and welcoming, and you can actually learn from everybody a lot of things you have no idea about. So you are not afraid here. We are not afraid of if we don't know anything, unlike in our countries, right? So this is kind of, especially in Silicon Valley, I really had the chances to work with people with multinational backgrounds, not real American background. I even can't recall who's really American here. So now for me, it's a diversity of the culture, openness, and people being helpful is very, very, that makes a difference. Without this, I wouldn't be here who I am today. And without that help, especially in a startup culture, people are willing to help you. You don't get in any other culture, even in Hawaii, you don't get that, right? Only in the valley, in this area, people are more helpful. So that's what I love. That's what my experience is. Yeah.
The thing I like the most about Americans, having worked recently in the charity nonprofit space, they're very charitable, they're very kind, they're very giving, they're very trusting. A lot of us from ex-USSR, we tend to be skeptical of any kind of enterprise. We know that we have to close ourselves off from other people and try not to be taken advantage of. I think Americans are more reliant on the rule of law in their country, and they give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and the trust is given, not earned here.
Trust is given, not earned here. Trust first, verify later. Good. So, other questions or comments? Yes, Katya.
I've been here for over maybe 25 years, and I've been fortunate too. So the question is, do you guys still want to stay here? Because I don't anymore. I think the valley changed and not for the best, like in my opinion. So it's very hectic. There is less upward mobility unless you get really lucky, like in the startup. There is a whole mess with education. I'm dealing with my daughter transitioning from the middle school to the high school. Like private schools here, $50,000 and you can get in. The parents have to donate like another $500,000 to get in. Like who can afford it? Okay, like if you cashed out like millions and and we live on Woodside actually. So like I bought house like years ago, so it's fortunate. But a lot of people who come here, a lot of my friends that I thought, okay, so this is a great opportunity. I don't see it anymore because actually if you just make a salary, I started as a hardware engineer. I have PhD in mechanical engineering, master's in operational research from Stanford. So when I started 20 years ago, maybe a little bit less, as a mechanical engineer, I was making $150K a year that time, and it was real money. Right now, if I were still, like I'm an entrepreneur, but if I was still a mechanical engineer, it would be same 150K. I'm not kidding. So that's like, I think, and what's happening with the whole country and the stuff, like we're actually thinking about maybe going back to Europe or whatever. So I'm just, like you guys saying how you're in love with this whole thing, like still going on. Maybe you're much younger, I don't know. So I just want some perspective. Yeah.
It's also about whether or not we believe there's still opportunity here, if I read the question right. It's something I struggle with because I have an ability, like, I've been traveling all the time for last 5 years. I went back to Russia about 5 years back, and I really decided I'm going to go back to Russia. This is like the land of opportunity. Russia was booming. And it's definitely was like I literally almost like looked for a job at Google, right? Like I was like, I'm going to Russia. I think over the last 5 years, the situation changed, so I would never go back to Russia now. I think as a country, it's incredibly difficult to do business with the sanctions right now. There is a lot of businesses, and a lot of my friends are losing their businesses. Every conversation you have in Russia right now is, how do I get out? Now, going to Europe is challenging as well. I mean, the only country I would go to, and I'm not Jewish, is Tel Aviv, right? Like, I love Tel Aviv. Israel is fantastic. I won't live anywhere else in Europe because it's going back to being very, very discriminatory, as you mentioned. I mean, Czech Republic is a very Catholic country, and I've spent a lot of time. My parents still live in Czech Republic. It's a very difficult place to be. There isn't a country that, I'm in London, but London has all the same problems the Valley has. It's expensive, housing is expensive. You know, you have to have a very good job. So I don't necessarily, I agree with you, it's not the same land of opportunity that probably was 10 years ago. Yeah, but I also don't know where would I go, I think is the question. And I don't really necessarily, for all my travels, I haven't found a place. The only one that's on my list is New Zealand. But I don't know. I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
Well, I am now U.S. citizen, and I haven't given up my citizenship, but my country kind of doesn't allow double citizenship. I haven't been in my country since I left, which is 14 years. But my goal is I'm gonna stay here around in the Valley until I achieve what I plan to achieve. And once day comes where I can do something more to give it back, then I have some plans to do in my country, but I don't think I'm gonna live there. I will be kind of supporting the community and society through technology and innovation.
I would agree with you that the Valley is not what it used to be. When I moved here in 2006, a lot of things I liked then are not the same now. That said, I'm at a point in my life where my mindset is about not finding a great place to live, but making the place I live in great. So I want to fight for a better Valley. I want to stay here. I think there's a lot of potential here still. So I don't know exactly how to influence it, maybe go into politics, maybe through community grassroots movements, but we need to move this place forward and help our crumbling infrastructure, help our runaway costs, and make it what it can be.
Do we have time for a couple more questions or comments? Yes? Please. I suggest everybody come to Boston. It's awesome, right? Right, Doug? It's booming. It really is booming. Yes, Vladimir, who, speaking of Boston, MBA graduate from Northeastern University from a couple of decades ago. My very first student from the Soviet Union.
Okay, so my name is Vladimir. This is actually for you, Sheila, the question. I'm just curious, did you try to get Sergey Brin into your book? Like, it would be neat to have him here, right?
What do you think? You know me. Of course I tried to get Sergey Brin. I tried many times through many different avenues, and we wanted to have him to write the foreword to the book. And we asked some people from Google to help us, among other people. Although he is very supportive of immigration, particularly in tech, he tries to separate himself from, let's say, other I guess from favoring various publications and so on. Thank you for asking, though. Anyone else? Yes, of course.
What was most surprising for you for all the interviews and all the discussions you've had with all of us? What was the most surprising discovery that you didn't think you're going to find?
I really enjoyed hearing about people's mentors. Who shaped you? Who helped to make you who you are. It was fascinating. We have a chapter on it. And people talked so fondly of their family members, their grandparents who raised them while both their parents were off working, the people who were teachers who inspired them, people who told them. One story, just as an example of someone who is not here. She said, this was a woman in Boston, and she was about 8 years old, and she came home all excited about grandfather Lenin. And at the dinner table, she said, "Oh, look what we learned about our grandfather today." And her father said, "Wait a minute. Lenin is not your grandfather. You have two really wonderful grandfathers, and let me make the distinction for you." And then she got a lesson in communist ideology and the Soviet system, etc. The people, as I say, in their families, in the educational system, and their mentors here in the United States. That was a great question, Raj, about who helped you here in the U.S. And people were they wouldn't hesitate for a moment. They would name names and make sure you put that person's name in the book, right? And they couldn't believe the generosity, the sharing, and the helping that they got from professionals and people in school after, I guess, they could understand what you were trying to say, Yulia, once you spoke English well enough, right? So thank you for that question. Well, perhaps we should conclude now, and you can, there's still a little food and drink left, and I would like to bring Mike and Philip and